morning. The Maryland Public Service Commission will come to order. First order of business this morning is approval of the minutes from the January 22nd, 2020 meeting. All in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. Mr. Secretary, the consent agenda, please.
Mr. Chairman, there are two items on today's consent agenda, both from Geronimo Energy LLC. The first is an application for certification as a renewable energy facility for a unit named Com Green River 2 WF, and the second is an application for certification as a renewable energy facility for a unit named Com Green River 1F.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Commissioners will have questions if staff counsel is available. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chang. What is the value of on the first item? It's 50 megawatts. What's the approximate value of the RECs associated with that?
Good morning, Commissioners. Chairman Michael Jang on behalf of staff. So approximately for the first one, the 50 megawatts is around $700,000.
And is that a one-time or is it recurring? Help us understand how that works.
So I believe that would be year to year.
Year to year, $700,000, and for how many years?
Until the wind farm stops producing.
So in this one, that'll probably be a long time, I suspect. So it's a lot of money, about $700,000 a year that Maryland ratepayers are paying to this particular facility is in Deer Grove, Illinois, correct?
Yes.
Like most of the wind farms, they're not in Maryland. Most of them, they're going somewhere else, mainly in the Midwest. And the approximate value for the second one?
For the second one, it's approximately $2 million.
About $2 million a year going to Illinois again, year after year after year.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jang. That's my only questions.
Any additional questions? Is there a motion? Motions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For items number 1 and 2, I move that we approve the application and issue a renewable energy facility certification number, direct the company to establish a REC account with PJM Gatz within 30 days of certification, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved. Mr. Secretary, the administrative agenda.
Mr. Chairman, item number 3 on the agenda is an application from Grid Power Direct LLC for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in Maryland.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Jang on behalf of staff. Item number 3 is excuse me. Item number 3 is an application by Grid Power Direct to obtain a license to supply electricity services in Maryland. The company applied to serve all customer classes in Maryland, but intends to only start serving commercial and industrial customers. Staff contacted the company regarding its application to serve residential customers in Maryland. The company stated that they do not currently provide residential services, but intend to possibly in the future serve those customers. They also stated that they would provide staff with training and marketing materials related to their residential class before their utilization. The company, so staff has reviewed the application and believes that the application has satisfied the requirements to provide electricity supply services in Maryland. Staff's revised recommendation is staff recommends that the Commission grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland. Additionally, the company is directed to provide marketing and training materials for the residential customer class specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff and Office of People's Counsel 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland. Finally, staff recommends the Commission direct the company to notify the Commission within 30 days of any changes of the information upon which the Commission relied in granting this license.
Thank you, Mr. Jang. Sounds like you made a motion. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No additional questions. I just appreciative for staff for looking into it further, and I'm also thankful that the company was responsive.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if, is there a representative here from Grid Power Direct? No? Okay, I'll ask staff. The company indicated in one of their submittals they wanted the marketing materials to be held confidential by the commission. And I found that strange because it seems antithetical to the purposes of having marketing materials. Can you help me understand? I know it's not your responsibility, but
I could not speak for the company directly.
the wisdom of counsel.
Just a suggestion, I suspect it's more the training materials than the specific marketing materials, because you would not necessarily want your competitors to know what you are telling your people about what they have to do going out to market.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and that's why I didn't reference the training materials part of it, because I could see how that could be construed to be proprietary, but they specifically asked for their financial information related to the application and their marketing information related to the application, and I just,
Well, I can certainly understand the financial information, but the marketing information, I have the same question you do, is ultimately it's got to become public.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Jang did present the motion, but just to be on the record, if I could request a motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move we grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland for all customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. Direct the company to provide marketing and training materials for the residential class specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff and the Office of People's Counsel 30 days prior to using the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application.
Thank you. All in favor? The motion is approved.
Item number 4 is a request from the Commission's technical staff for guidance regarding requirements for low and moderate income verification.
Thank you. If the parties could be seated at the table. Do we have representatives from the Maryland Energy Administration that wish to be seated at the table? Oh, actually, we are a short. Oh, are we not short one? Okay. Mr. Kaufman, have a seat. We have a representative from the LMI Advocates, OPC, Staff Council. What about Nextamp? Do we have? You're from Nextamp. Staff Council, can we provide one seat for Nextamp? Thank you. It's on the left. All right, let's begin just by taking some appearances. Ms. Garofalo.
Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. And with me today is Philip Vanderhayden, the Commission staff's Assistant Executive Director.
Being a backbencher today. Thank you, Mr. Vanderhayden.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Jacob Auslander on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jake Springer, Senior Policy Associate with Nexamp.
Good morning. Susan Stevens Miller, representing the 11 organizations that are low and moderate income advocates and that file comments in addressing the staff filing.
Eric Kaufman, Division Director of Energy Programs, Maryland Energy Administration. Also joining me today are Ryan Opsel, Director of Policy, and David Comas, Energy Program Manager for Solar Energy.
Thank you. I think I have all the parties that made filings and pleadings in the case. Is there anybody else? No. Good. Okay. Ms. Garofalo, Staff Council kicked this off back on November 25th with a request for guidance from the Commission, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, by this filing, staff is requesting the Commission issue an order clarifying that self-attestation, as used in the COMAR 2062, does not qualify as an alternate means, aside from income verification or participation in the Maryland Home Energy Programs assistance programs, to verify the status of low and moderate income subscribers. In light of the generous allocation of capacity accorded LMI subscriber organizations, staff requests that Commission interpret COMAR 2062-0303D3 as excluding self-attestation as a means of verifying gross annual household income, because this method does not constitute true verification and thus is inconsistent with COMAR 2062-0303D1 and 2. Under Comar 2062, low income is described as a subscriber whose gross annual household income is at or below 175% of the federal poverty level for the year of subscription, or is certified as eligible for any federal, state, or local assistance program that limits participations to households whose income is at or below 175% of the federal poverty level. Moderate income is defined under Comar 20-620102B13 as a subscriber whose gross annual household income is at or below 80% of the median income from Maryland for the year of subscription, so therefore it would change from year to year. Comar 20-620303D1 provides the Commission may establish alternate means aside from income verification or participation in the Maryland Office of Home Energy Programs Assistance Programs to verify the status of low and moderate income subscribers, and Comar 20-620303D3 provides that a subscriber organization shall certify to the electric company in writing that the subscriber organization has verified the eligibility of all LMI subscribers needed to qualify for the program prior to receiving permission to operate from the electric company. In support of its request, staff notes that the energy assistance programs and other assistance programs require income verification before participation is allowed. Likewise, HUD Housing verifies income to assure that potential renters are eligible for the type of HUD housing sought, and the Commission has recognized the HUD criteria in the Elkton area. Proof of current participation in these programs could be accepted. In other words, the subscriber organizations do not themselves have to do the verification, but staff does recommend that verification be required, and that believes that is consistent with Comar 2062. In addition, the MEA has assisted the working group by suggesting the use of fee-based providers of income verification services at what appears to be a reasonable cost. One of these companies, a local Annapolis-based firm with experience in programs in several other states, recently made a presentation to the working group advising of the process by which income verification could be obtained using an IRS program without requiring the subscriber organization to retain wage, tax, or other personal documentation. Finally, it's staff position that allowing self-attestation would be equivalent to relaxing, perhaps even removing the requirement for income verification. As a pilot, it is staff's position that verification is required in order to study the effect on LMI of community solar, and for this reason, it is important that the data that is used be reliable. For these reasons, staff respectfully requests that the Commission issue an order clarifying that self-attestation alone does not qualify as an alternate means aside from income verification or participation in the Maryland Office of Home Energy Programs Assistance Programs to verify the status of low and moderate income subscribers.
Thank you, Ms. Gruffalo. We'll next take the state agencies and then the two other parties in the order that they filed. So we'll start with OPC, then MEA, then Earth Justice, and we'll conclude with Nextamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. OPC supports staff's recommendation on this issue that self-attestation not be permitted to take the place of income verification as currently contained in Comar. We are sympathetic to the plight of developers in obtaining low and moderate income subscribers to these facilities, and we certainly would not want to see a program that lacked substantial low and moderate income participation because of the challenges of income verification. However, we were unable to go as far as some of the recommendations by the low and moderate income advocates. My office did participate in those calls, and we do support some of the recommendations that group has made, but our filed position is that we support staff's position that self-attestation alone not be permitted as a suitable form of income verification.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
As illustrated in our previous testimony, Maryland Energy Administration looks at this as self-attestation alone is not adequate, but combined with some other form of verification or supporting documentation from another program could help give a streamlined, inexpensive, and effective way to get more LMI consumers into the community solar market.
Thank you. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The low and moderate income advocates are becoming increasingly concerned that determining how to verify whether someone is low or moderate income is taking far too long. Essentially, the net metering working group has been talking about it for over a year, and during this time period, it's becoming increasingly difficult for solar developers to move ahead with low and moderate income projects because they don't know exactly how they are to verify that their 10% or 20% of their subscribers are low or moderate income. So rather than just find that self-attestation cannot be used, which our reading of the initial staff filing did not say self-attestation only. Now, while we don't agree with that, we could accept that if the commission made clear that self-attestation in combination with something else could be used. We just don't want self-attestation to be totally off the table. But I also note that what the regulation actually says is the commission may establish alternative means aside from income verification. So income verification in the regs itself is not necessary as long as the commission determines something else to take its place. And the other thing we would like the commission to do is we listed several state and federal programs that actually do income verification, and we would like the commission to expressly designate that those programs, if you participate in those programs, evidence that you participate in those programs is verification enough of your income so that the low and moderate income people don't have to keep repeatedly demonstrating what their income is. So if the commission could develop a list, we've provided several, and we think it should be an ongoing list, that because we certainly don't claim to know every program that's out there, that if someone finds another program where the standards meet the income requirements, they can petition the commission to have that added to the list so that the solar developers can actually begin to move forward and know what to do. We've also suggested that you could use self-attestation in combination with Census Tract data to determine low and moderate income. And that's something we would seriously like the commission to consider, because there are sadly a number of low and moderate income people who don't know about programs that are available to them and don't take advantage of them. So that this would enable solar developers to get those people involved in their programs without providing a lot of income data. I think it's important to remember that the pool of subscribers we're talking about here, first of all, are very wary of dealing with companies. They've been burned before, and so it's very difficult to impact that. And they're also, quite frankly, often very wary of dealing with government agencies. So it harms the program, and I believe that the Commission and the General Assembly seriously wanted low and moderate income people to participate in this program. It harms the ability to get them to participate in the program if you set up barriers that they can't meet or that they are disturbed about meeting. And having them provide a lot of income information is one of the barriers that people know from working in other states really harms their willingness to participate in the program. And Staff Council noted something, and I want to stress that the low and moderate income tranche is a benefit to the solar developers. The subscriber, a low and moderate income subscriber, gets no more benefit than a non-low and moderate income subscriber. The tranche benefits the solar developer, but so the burden shouldn't be placed on the low and moderate income subscriber to have the solar developer achieve that tranche. And so I think that's very important to bear in mind. And the other thing we asked for was simply one of the requirements for moderate income is that it be Maryland median income. If the commission on its community solar website could just put what it considers that median income to be, so everyone's using the same number, we think that would be helpful to all the solar developers. And I'm certainly available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Springer.
Great. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to speak this morning. First of all, I should say that Nexamp has been part of the discussions with the low and moderate income advocates, and we support those consensus recommendations, and we think those offer a potential path forward for the commission. So we want to associate ourselves with those recommendations. In addition, we filed sort of a lengthy document, so I'll go more quickly this morning on some of our views. I think in particular, the thing that I want to drive home for you all this morning is that this is a major challenge for us in working through Maryland's Community Solar Pilot Program. We have one current LMI project in Maryland in Delmarva Service Territory. It's a 2 megawatt project that became operational back in June. And the low and moderate income component of that project is a 51% low and moderate income project. We had major challenges subscribing that project. Finding these customers is a huge challenge for our company. It's something that we want to be doing in Maryland, but it is a major challenge. And we see that both in Maryland and in other markets where we operate. I would say that from the outset, the biggest challenge we find dealing with these customers is many of them have hurdles such as a lack of reliable access to internet. They're located in rural areas. They or otherwise do not have access to internet. We have to close some of our sales process over postal service. So we are sending documents via the mail in many cases, and we find that in those cases our drop-off rate is over 50%. So if a customer we're talking to over the phone, we need to send them documents or we need to receive documents via mail, we're going to have a major drop-off there. These are folks that would otherwise be interested in participating in the program, but this year logistical hurdles become almost insurmountable at a certain point for many customers. In addition, we find that there's a major drop-off if any of that information is sensitive. So if it contains wage information, social security number, any sort of information like that, we're going to see another major drop-off of the customers that are willing to participate with us, and also for the reasons that Ms. Miller has already talked about today with past experience in that community and working with maybe some bad actors in the past. And I would also like to say that we are committed to the program here in Maryland, and we want to see it be successful, and we want to find solutions that work both for us and for the consumers here in Maryland. Many of these steps that staff has suggested in terms of retaining documents, I want to point out that for developers, it's not so simple as the fact that we do not want to use these methods. It's the fact that the consumers do not want to use these methods, and they will not use these methods. They will opt out of participation in the program if they are forced to provide these kinds of documentation. That's what we have seen so far working in Maryland, and that's our big concern going forward, is that we have the ability to work with these customers and to get them verified and get them functioning in the program. So happy to answer any more questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Springer. When the legislature, in its wisdom, promulgated this law, I don't think they ever intended that we would set the barriers so high to dissuade these targeted customer base to not participate or not return their applications by mail. Obviously, we have a problem now if it's taken the work group over a year. From what I've heard from all the parties today, I have not heard that self-attestation plus is prohibited. So I want to turn that question directly to both staff and OPC to confirm. Are you opposed with having any aspect of self-attestation, or are any of the proposals similar to what we've heard acceptable?
I guess while they're conferring, OPC can go first. There were two specific proposals of an attestation plus included in the comments of the low and moderate income advocates. OPC at this time can support one but not the other. We at this time do not support the idea of using qualified census tracts plus self-attestation as an acceptable means of income verification. However, we would accept a system whereby there would be a review of the documents during an income verification process, and then have them not be retained by the community solar subscriber organization, and instead what would be retained would be an attestation by both the subscriber and the witnessing agent from the subscriber organization. So that's as far as we've been able to go with specific suggestions about attestation plus some other method.
So you'd be comfortable if a representative from the subscriber organization, let's say at the kitchen table of the lower moderate income potential customer, both sign a document saying, As the subscriber organization, I saw evidence that this customer was participated in MEEP or some other program. Is that right?
Well, I think actually in the context of a proxy type verification, I think it might be simpler to. I'm not sure that we need to make it that complicated. I guess what we were sort of envisioning is maybe what the individuals at that table would be sitting down and looking at would be tax returns or pay stubs, and then what would be included in the attestation is a memorial that those documents were reviewed and that the the income level indicated in those documents was at or below the thresholds for low and moderate income participation.
With respect to the issue that the LMI advocates propose that you do not agree with regarding census tract data, I think you recognized in your filing that there's some sort of a perverse disincentive here where the subscriber organizations would target particular lower income, moderate income census tract in order to find enough customers. What is the problem with that?
So I think maybe target is sort of a loaded word. I would say that they would be encouraged to focus their energy there because it would be much, I would imagine, much less expensive and much less laborious to do their marketing there. And the concern would be that there would be less marketing done in other areas of the state that might have significant numbers of low and moderate income individuals, but just not residing in a qualified census tract.
Does that matter? I mean, there was no requirement that the benefits be spread broadly, just that these thresholds be met. So does it matter if we sign up just folks in a low-income neighborhood of Baltimore City to the neglect of Rockville?
Well, it's always an interesting aspect of lawyering to frame the issues in certain ways. But I would certainly say that the enabling legislation envisioned that there would be community solar facilities spread throughout the service territories in the state, and my view is that consistent with that goal of the legislature, the idea that we would concentrate low and moderate income population participation into certain areas of the state would sort of be antithetical to that overall goal of making sure that these benefits are spread across the state.
That may be speculation, but I also suspect you may be right. It would be less expensive for the subscriber to focus on a particular area. The same question for Mr. Van der Hayden.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I think our primary concern is having reliable data so that we can study this and report back to the legislature as to whether or not the program would proceed or if it obtained the benefits we are expected. Clearly, and I think OPC has made a very good point in that if we essentially provide a signal that, go for the least expensive approach to signing up customers, we may concentrate customers within certain census tracts and then not have an understanding as to whether or not folks are going to be responsive to the prices they were seeing in other portions of the state. One of the things I think we've heard today is that low and moderate income customers are not receiving different pricing and as part of the marketing business plans from developers. So that leads me to perhaps wonder if we're actually providing a significant benefit, which was, again, another point of this program. My understanding of a lot of the pricing that folks are seeing from subscriptions is that it's not a savings to customers relative to what they're receiving from SOS or retail choice contracts. So one of the things we were trying to do here is, if you recall, net metering is construed as a benefit to the customer because they are receiving the benefit of the use of the distribution system, and they're essentially paying for that by procuring distributed energy at their location. So, one of the things we're testing here is that benefit what we expect? Are those benefits to the distribution system showing up? So there is a desire, I think, to spread distributed generation throughout the service territory and to also understand how benefits are accruing to customers through participation in the program. And if customers are paying the same price everywhere and there's no method, no desire to reduce prices for lower and moderate income customers to actually give them a benefit that they can see in their monthly energy bills, we may be running kind of astray from one of what I understood to be the primary reasons we were expanding this program and covering it. So We have a requirement in the law to report back to the legislature when the program is complete. Low and moderate income customer benefits are clearly laid out as something we are supposed to study. If we are unable to provide a broad, statewide, geographically dispersed set of information that shows how customers in various levels of the low or moderate income are participating, what sort of benefits they're receiving, it becomes difficult for us to provide a quality report back to the legislature.
I'm just afraid that we won't have enough data, whether it be statewide on a more regional basis, if we can't get participants into the program in a more timely manner.
Your Honor, I don't think it's a question of all of the LMI developers are having these same kinds of problems. Some of them are able to make use of, for example, the MEA grant program, which my understanding includes funds to use the verification process that Ms. Garofalo mentioned from the local firm. The cost that we've identified for this is on the order of $40 per customer. My understanding is while it is a web-based approach, they can also make a phone call to this vendor, provide information over the phone, and have it submitted for them that way. So we understand, and we're trying to do everything we can to leverage existing income verification programs like OHEP or the LIHEAP programs or any number of housing programs that already do this so that it happens one time and we can leverage it. I think our primary concern here is that we will be signing up customers and we will not have in any way actually verified what their income level is.
Well, I agree with you there. There needs to be some oversight and verification to make sure that the subscribers just aren't signing up everybody with a wink and a nod. I don't think that's going to be the case. But since, Mr. Vanderheden, you mentioned that $40 verifier system, I just wanted to ask MEA, you didn't mention that in your comments. Is that something you're supportive of or not?
So we participated in the work group, and that's one of the items is brought up as a path, but it may also not be the only path that's appropriate for many consumers that are already participating in vetted programs for specific that correlate to specific low and moderate income consumers. So that wasn't the only. We did participate and mention that as part of the discussion. It may be something worth discussing for moderate income and others, but there are other paths that may be easier and more effective and get people to the table faster.
Okay. I recognize that, Ms. Miller, you have effectively a proposal or counter proposal to the request that Staff Council has made. I'm going to open it up to the other commissioners, but I may have some more questions regarding the details of your 7 requests.
Can I respond to the consensus and the fear of it only going to targeted areas and everyone else being left out? I think, first of all, it's important to remember that there's a state cap, a service territory cap, and then a cap per tranche. So there's only a minimal amount of megawatts available in the low and moderate income tranche. So once that's filled, then companies that want to do low and moderate income projects are going to have to go to other service territories, or if we're reflecting the level of poverty in Baltimore City as compared to other areas. So I don't believe it's actually going to happen that essentially only people in these census tracts are approached.
Why don't we stop you there? Mr. Auslander, do you want to respond to that? Ms. Miller is saying that effectively because of the regional breakdowns by utility, we're going to have the distribution, minimum distribution required by law.
Right. So I think that there is some merit to what Ms. Miller is saying, and as we indicated in our comments, this qualified census tract approach is one that we can't support at this time. We have been working internally on our position. There were stakeholders during the calls that also opposed the approach. I don't believe that anyone has filed comments opposed to this qualified census tract approach, and that certainly informed the decision-making of my agency.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Richard.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just start with MEA. I was interested, you termed it as paths, and it appeared from my reading of the testimony that MEA was in favor or could support the attestation plus concept. Speaking of the 7 proposals, Are there any of those proposals in the from the advocates that MEA specifically has a concern about as a path?
So definitely on Attestation Plus. They've mentioned a number of proposals, and MEA staff were involved in crunching some of the data and sharing some of the data we have in the analysis. I think overall many of them work well. The census tracts may require a little more discussion, but one of the things, there's other options there that we would hate to, that I don't know would be best if they were held up while that discussion occurs. So there might be some paths forward on things like Head Start and Medicaid as options, as opposed while the issue of the census tract could be discussed further.
Okay, so the proxy items that you're fully in support of then with Attestation Plus. Where are the issues? I mean, given again this is a limited scope at this point as far as the number of participants we're trying to sign up in the low and moderate income. What is the issue that MEA has at this time with attestation? I mean, are you concerned people are going to be lying to get into this program? As was pointed out, there's no particular benefit to the participant, the low or moderate income participant. So what is the issue with combining the census with the attestation?
So we're cognizant that a participant in community solar is not receiving a windfall. This is getting people access to the clean energy economy. The attestation alone, we do have concerns that it's very easy to take something like an attestation and fold it into. I've always used the example of a software license agreement where you're initialing for a large number of things. The census tract issue is mainly an issue of data and understanding how that would be across the state as a whole. And being able to understand that, we're very willing to continue that discussion with the advocates and other parties.
Okay. How much more discussion do you think is needed? I mean, I'm concerned that we've already had a year of discussion, and I think what we're hearing from program developers is that we are failing right now in getting the low and moderate income tranche filled up. So this seems to be a practical way of at least focusing efforts to reach this category. So what more needs to be discussed?
For us, that's part of what we're looking at here, is that we acknowledge and are concerned that the time has taken a while to where it's clear for the developers and the subscription organizations to be able to bring people on board, particularly when there's programs that we're funding projects. We want to see people tied to these projects. I think in terms of the census data, it is such a broad issue. There's a lot of variability across the state. We'd like to dive a little deeper, but that shouldn't preclude taking advantage of some of those other items that might be very easy to verify and very appropriate.
Okay, so it's just a deeper dive in understanding. I mean, I think it was suggested in one of the filings that if there was a majority preponderance in that census tract, that might be a green light to move forward. Is that something where MEA is prepared to support? Again, a large majority in that census tract, or is that the type of deeper dive that you're looking at trying to do?
Yeah, I think so. Taking that deeper look at that to see, and again, at a more statewide level of how that data reflects across the state.
Okay, and this deeper, I'm sorry if I keep repeating this question, but can this deeper dive, can you put could it be done in a month? I mean, if you focused attention, would you be able to finish this deeper dive?
I would need to sit down with the team and see what it would take. I really can't answer that one today, but I could discuss that with the team and see what it would take to work through those issues.
And by virtue of the fact that you're here today, it seems like there is a wide gulf. I question whether a deeper dive or additional conversations between the parties will get you any closer. Hence why we're here today.
Okay, and just for staff, you've used word like required. That we have to have these documents, and it's not true verification. Where are you getting these legalistic, I guess parameters, bright lines? Because I just don't really see it right now in the public utility article. I mean, really, if we were just looking at the guidance we're given from the legislature, we're supposed to be facilitating, and we're supposed to be encouraging developers to promote. So, again, I'm confused where we're this basically this income verification is a creation of the rulemaking, and I think it was in our effort to try to promote, and encourage developers. But again, are we taking it to an extreme here now, to the detriment of this program? Because it is not succeeding right now. We are not getting low and moderate income, and we're stalling projects.
Your Honor, I would certainly defer to Ms. Garofalo to do the legal interpretation. I'm drawing the word requirement from the directives in the legislation to study this, and I'm just advising the Commission, to the best of our ability, that in order to provide an accurate study of the benefits to low and moderate income customers, we simply need to be very reliably informed that those are the ones participating.
But again, are we setting up a program to fail? I mean, you're saying we're studying it. If we already know, if we're being told by developers that this is a deterrent and it's not working, and we're learning about it early in the program, why would we continue down this path just if we already know now it's failing?
Right,
Why would we do that?
I don't
think. Do you think the legislature intended us to set up a program that was not going to succeed in its intent of including low and moderate incomes?
Your Honor, I don't know that I would take the position that anything is failing at this point. What we're trying to do
Is
is
it succeeding? Are we getting are we filling up the tranches with the low and moderate income?
Well, a number of the service
Participants?
territories are full, and there are 2 that are not, and a lot of that has to do with things like the price of land and other sorts of issues. I think what we are seeing is there are some developers that are able to participate and do income verification, and that there are others who would choose not to, perhaps based on the additional strings associated with, being able to sell a project to the ultimate subscriber organization that's going to operate it. We are simply recommending that in order to cover everything and provide the study, we need to verify the information. We are trying to do as much as we can to lower those barriers, leverage existing income verification programs. Obviously, there are many energy assistance programs that use this, and they all appear to be very successful at providing those benefits to the customer.
They're providing a benefit. In this case, we're trying to promote and encourage participation. So isn't that different?
Your Honor, I think this we're trying to encourage participation, but I don't know that we were attempting to do so in a manner that wouldn't allow us to study it properly.
Well, we're being told by the developers that the way we've instituted this program is a deterrent to signing up these people. So, well, let me stop there. I may have some other questions, but I want to let my fellow commissioners get in on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Mr. Springer. Mr. Springer, how does a company like Nexamp determine if their project is going to be a 51% LMI project or a 30%? How does that work? Explain that to me, please.
So we look at the current pipeline across the state of Maryland and look for projects. Well, we look for projects across the state, look for landowners, look for a basic opportunity where a solar project might work, and then we look at the different utility service territories, we look at the pipeline and competitors and who has other projects, and we look at where in the buckets, if you want to call them that the commission has set up, where there's an opportunity. So obviously the open category, a lot of interest there, but maybe there's less interest in the LMI category or in the SBO, the small brownfield other category. So we can target that category and change our projects accordingly based on where we think we're most likely to get awarded capacity.
And so the distinction between a 30% LMI and a 51% LMI project, is that are those the cutoffs that give you more opportunity to get capacity? In other words, if there are 2 competing projects out there that are LMI and one has an application at 30%, one has an application at 51%, all other things being equal, does the 51% LMI project prevail?
I'm not sure I'm understanding perfectly. Those would be in separate buckets. So the LMI bucket itself is a 30% LMI requirement, and the SBO bucket, you could be a small project, you could be a brownfield project,
Right,
or you could be a 51% LMI project. So that the 51 wouldn't be in, let's say, direct competition with a 30% LMI
Trying
project.
to figure out
Yeah.
why a developer would designate a project 30% or 51%. Help me understand that, please.
we would like to be we would like to put ourselves in a position to be awarded capacity. So if we see that there's an opening in the LMI bucket, we think that there's an opportunity, then we'll position our project that way. If we're not seeing that in a service territory, some service territories are more congested than others in terms of the projects that are in the pipeline, then we will look for another bucket, because at the end of the day, we will want to try to figure out the best way to do the project, but we can't do the project unless we are awarded the capacity. So
Are you telling me that a project only qualifies for SBO if it's 51% LMI?
no, that is one of the ways to qualify.
Okay.
As I understand it, to be an S.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would only use 51% if you were trying to get into the SBO category. You would never do that in the LMI category, right?
We could choose to do so, but it wouldn't be
why
a
would you?
requirement
Right.
from the commission.
Okay, so there is some discretion on the part of the developer up front as to what their project is going to look like with regard to how much LMI they have to verify. Is that true?
We would comply with whatever the commission's requirements are for that
Right.
bucket where we're awarded
But if
capacity.
you're deciding if you want to go after a SBO or an LMI project, you're making that decision. The state's not, our regulations are not, correct?
Yes, you're not forcing us to be. The commission would not be forcing us to be an LMI project if we didn't want to be an LMI project.
Right. So I'm wondering can staff tell us how many of these projects are less viable based on whether or not they're SBO 51% or LMI 30%? Can you give us some illumination on that?
You're right. I'm not sure that we'd be able to look at an individual project. I think what folks do is they look at the capacity available in the buckets or the categories. So the LMI category and the SBO category have about the same proportions. I think we've seen a lot of the projects in the small brownfield and other go towards the 51% LMI projects, but the other portion of them are actually typically going for a brownfield installation. So it's really just a matter of they look at the capacity that's available and choose to trying to get into one or the other. The LMI is less. I think maybe you're asking if the LMI has less capacity awarded than the SBO, and I would think that is correct.
Okay. So that kind of makes sense to me. So very good. I'm trying to figure out how much of this responsibility is on the subscriber organizations for the failure instead of our kind of gut reaction to blame the commission and the regs. So I'm trying to discern that. I haven't been able to do that yet. I'm trying to figure that out. So Ms. Miller, let me ask you some questions. Your census tract proposal would basically have half the state in and half the state out. Is that not correct?
Approximately. Yeah.
Roughly. Okay, so half the state would be eligible to do self-verification, and half the state would not. And would you agree that census tracts, although may be determined to be low to moderate income based on certain things, still have a variance of incomes in them, right?
Oh, I would say that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
We're not disputing that.
For instance, in southern Maryland, where I'm from, some of those counties are some of the highest per capita income counties in the entire United States for their size. And yet they have some dire poverty situations.
But I think the census tract is smaller than a county.
I understand that.
Just to point that out.
I understand that very well, but I'm just saying there will be census tracts, for instance, in my home county of Calvert County, that will be in, and census tracts that will not be in, even though there's almost a homogeneous mixture of wealthy and poor.
But the
throughout the county.
The important point I think is this is only one of the methods to determine LMI. Those LMI customers who aren't in the census tract that says they're a low-income customer can still become a subscriber if say they are in any of the federal programs or state programs. So this is just, we're not saying only use one method. We're saying use all the methods.
I understand. I'm just trying to understand the portion of the plus that is census tract based. How do you envision that a subscriber would, who had under your plan self-attestation capability, how would they do that? Would they check a box on the application?
I think that would depend on each solar developer. I envision there would be a form that says, I don't want to use the word attest, but putting aside the exact language that my income is below this level, and they would sign.
Would they sign that with an oath or affirmation under penalty of perjury?
I would not recommend penalty of perjury. For one, I think it's quite frankly, as a practical matter, not true. No one's going to prosecute these people for perjury if they lie. So, and two, we're dealing with a group of people who are already afraid of the government and afraid of the solar developer.
So my concern is not with the low or moderate income customer. My concern is with the developer and the unscrupulous motivations that may exist for the developer to be loose to meet their quota. Not that anybody would do that. I'm not pointing the finger at you, Mr. Springer. I'm just saying we have to safeguard the public interest here as well. And I think some of this is being lost. Would the developers be willing to sign an oath or affirmation if set the census tract piece aside? Just you go in and you say someone shows you their EBT card, your subscriber organization signs off that they've seen the EBT card, and would a oath or affirmation under penalty of perjury deter you from doing that?
Not necessarily. I mean, we would want to have a conversation about what exactly that process might look like, but in principle, no. And we already have to certify to the commission that we are doing what we're saying that we're doing in terms of our LMI customers. Our concern, again, is primarily around the exchange of documents. And from a consumer perspective, we don't want personal information, and we don't want to retain that. And from a company perspective, we really can't have that kind of personal information. We don't want it. We don't need it, don't want it. And I think we would be, customers, in our experience, do not lie about their income levels
I'm
when
not
we,
suggesting that.
and there's obviously a need.
We deal with retail suppliers all the time.
Of course.
And we know there are bad actors in that field. We know it very, very well. And we have very strict regulations for consumer protections and protecting the public interest, and it's violated all the time. So we got to be careful here.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's clearly a need on the part of the commission to maintain program integrity and for the program to work the way that the legislature intended it to. And that's why we're here today to try to figure out something that solutions that can balance both the need to maintain program integrity and to give a sense of assurance that these benefits are going to low and moderate income customers.
I think we have an obligation to do that. I share your feelings for that. We can't just fix this by allowing it, lowering the standards in a way that makes us think we're helping low and moderate income people avail themselves of the system when we may not be. Right? We got to make sure we have that covered, because that would be an injustice in my mind. So.
Absolutely, and we intend to serve these customers, and we think that their participation in the program is central to the success of the program as it was designed by the General Assembly and as set up in the program regulations by the Commission. Our concern is just that we are deterring their participation during a pilot phase of the program, and that will impact the ability of the General Assembly to have the information they need if they choose to design a permanent program and how to design that program. So we would hope that the Commission can look at ways to ensure that there's robust, strong participation from the LMI community in these projects during this pilot phase, and we can learn from that process, ahead of that report.
I get you. So I agree with Ms. Miller that there's not going to be perjury police out there trying to enforce this stuff. I get it. We have a program in the state right now where people sign under penalty of perjury that their historic automobile registration is not going to be used for general traffic, general transportation. It's only going to be used for shows, and it's violated all the time. All you have to do is open your eyes and look at the plates as you travel around the state of Maryland on the type of vehicles, and that's an abuse of the system, and it's done under penalty of perjury all the time. and the state police will tell you they don't have the capacity to enforce it. So I don't disagree with Ms. Miller. I don't think anybody here is trying to stop these programs from going forward. But we got to be careful we don't blow big holes in them, and maybe a half step is to do the attestation plus, but not the census tracts to me is fraught with some peril. At least at this point, I think we're hearing MEA say that and OPC say that, and so
Staff agrees with that as well, even if
Staff.
we go beyond our position. We like to think we've gone beyond using census tract as a identifier of the people who live within it.
I would ask the developers to think real hard about their willingness to sign an oath or affirmation, though, because it will at least put some credible guide rails in place.
Yeah.
Should we get a bad actor?
Yeah, I can't speak for all developers, of course, but I don't see that as being a problem for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. So I have a couple of questions for OPC and staff, and to the extent for NextAmp as well, since you are one CSEG here today, who filed comments in this proceeding. We've talked a lot about the types of documents and information that a low-income or low and moderate-income customer would provide in order to be verified as to participate in this program. So I guess my first question is, I'm trying to understand what's that list of documents? Is this process inspired by the process that the OHEP program currently uses, or is there a different type of standard?
OHEP, I believe, uses, they do verify income. They will verify it based on, they won't necessarily require W-2, but they do require proof of income or lack thereof. And I think that most of the programs on Ms. Miller's list use something similar to what OHEP uses, and if they don't now, all these programs will be using something similar in the future because they'll have a combined database.
Okay, so is it the intention that since OHEP is only certifying low-income customers and not moderate income, is it the intention that CSEGs in the future will be able to access that database? Is that?
I don't believe so. I don't believe OHEP would have that.
I don't think it's going to happen. I just want to be clarify. Okay, so the OHEP process is actually in their Code of Maryland regulations. I believe it's 0703-2105. So that's where their application process is listed, and with the my colleagues' indulgence, there are 9 different items that they note here that is required for a complete MEP application. And it's a fairly extensive type of documents. I mean, Social Security information, income information, verification of identity, verification of immigration status, proof of rental status, names of all household members. There's several other items in addition to that. So I guess my question is, for the CSEGs now, maybe perhaps for NextAmp, are you collecting all of this kind of information today? Is this what you're attempting to gather now from low-income and moderate-income customers?
No, we're not collecting personal sensitive information like that, no.
Are you reviewing this kind of information in order to determine that a customer meets the low or moderate-income status?
I don't want to speak, I don't want to mischaracterize the work we've done. We've done taken a number of different approaches to working with customers. It depends a little bit on how we encounter each customer. So I don't want to mischaracterize that, but we do work with the customers to ascertain their income and if they participate in certain programs or others. But again, I don't have it, the exact. We're still working on our strategy to how to get to these customers as we try to figure out the rules and what the commission expects in terms of the verification process. So it's still sort of a work in progress. We're trying to almost throw the kitchen sink at trying to figure out how to do this. So.
All right, and I appreciate that. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot or anything. You're the only one here, so. But I appreciate the response. So I guess this is the process that the Office of Home Energy Programs uses, are they participating in the meetings that you had earlier? Was there a representative there?
They are sometimes on the phone, but I would say they're not always on the phone. We try and let them know if we're talking about something we think would affect them. I would say that with regard to all these elements, some of which I think would be of interest to the subscriber organizations, like whether or not they're actually at the address they say they're at. But the if for virtually all of these programs, they do get a letter saying that they are authorized to participate in this program, or their application has been accepted, I believe is maybe what the letter says. That I think that staff would view that as verification, because although the subscriber organization had not verified it, this information, OHEP had verified it.
Okay. So what is, for staff and OPC, what is your response to the Earth Justice and I guess to some extent even XAMP's argument that requiring customers to provide this level of information is a bit of a deterrence to them participating in the program?
If I may, OPC would agree with that concern. We mentioned in our comments very early on that we believe the best approach is to have a state agency do the income verification for the program. It's how they do it in D.C. That's how we do it for a lot of other types of programs in the state. At this point, we're sort of at an impasse because although the enabling legislation set up a LMI aspect of this community solar pilot program, it was really silent about how we were going to go about doing that. And I guess it's probably above everybody's pay grades here about whether or not a particular state agency is going to be assigned that task. And so that's, I think, what maybe we're struggling with.
Well, just to before you continue, just stop you there on that. We currently have a state agency that provides that type of assessment for low-income customers,
but only for a specific. So, and
but not for moderate income.
That's correct, and I think that would be part of the challenge. Is that and I think that there's two challenges. One is you're correct. People who are applying for the EUSP program are coming in and they would be able to see what the income thresholds are, and then they're providing documentation to prove that they are at or below that threshold. So OHEP, for example, does not really have mechanisms in place, or they're not staffed to perform the moderate income aspect of this program. And my understanding is that is probably one of the challenges of if you're going to assign duties to a state agency to perform this function, then there are costs associated with that. And it's my understanding that at this point, the agencies in the state that might be in a position to do income verification do not have the resources to do the income verification for this program.
All right. So yeah, we know what we see every year, what the Office of Home Energy Program seeks regarding administrative costs. Mm-hmm. We know that doesn't cover everything, but that's the cost that they seek from the EUSP program. And that's just for applying their work requirement for the low income component.
Sure.
The moderate income is much larger. So
that's correct. I don't want to speak for Bill Freeman or his agency, but we have spoken informally about this particular issue, and I would imagine that if he was here today, that is what he would say.
Okay. So I guess my last question, then, along those lines regarding the cost of doing this, there was a suggestion in one of the comments that there was other organizations that would provide the certification. I believe it was in MEA's comments. Is that correct?
It was something we brought up in the work groups, yes,
okay.
as a possible path.
Okay. And so these are organizations that, are they, could you tell us a little more about them? Are they Maryland-based? Are they...
One is Maryland-based, and these are organizations that do that verification. There is a cost, which then of course obviously becomes into part of the project and the cost of doing business and enrolling consumers. So I think that was an item we were looking at. There may be more efficient ways to do it, especially for the low income segment, based on some of these other programs that have already done that vetting that would give a more streamlined process. But that may be a tool that still stays in the proverbial toolkit for individuals or consumers that don't fit into one of those programs.
All right.
Does that require the consent of the enrollee?
Yeah, sure. Is that...
Sorry, we're not getting the benefit of the discussion.
Oh, the question was if that's a additional firm, if they were conducting certifications, uh, and what would be the party's comment on that in terms of the need to have permission from the customer to do the certification? Do you see that as a necessity or part of the requirement?
In terms of is that directed at MEA?
Yes.
In terms of the organization, it could be.
Okay.
Trying to get actually an angle on and trying to get a idea on the cost from our staff expert.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Springer, I'm going to ask you a little more directly, and if you choose to use the same answer, that's okay. I understand. But how do you sign up customers now and verify? You don't have to just give me a range of how you do it. How are you verifying now?
So we work with customers. Depends on how we encounter them. I'm going to unfortunately have to give a similar answer just because I don't want to mischaracterize it. But we work with them to ascertain whether or not we can see immediately whether or not they participate in a program like an OHEP program. Sometimes sometimes you can see that on a bill, but my understanding is not all the time, and I'm not sure why the distinction there. But sometimes by looking at a customer's bill, we can see that they participate in the program, and so we know from that they're a low-income customer and they're a participant. We also work to ascertain their income, and they can attest to us their income, and we also look for a range of programs, and then we've been trying to figure out what alternatives exist within this working group and others. That will satisfy the commission's goals here, because from our perspective there is a lack of clarity, and we're going out there trying to do everything we can, but we're finding that there's a significant challenge in both understanding what is expected of us from the commission and what folks are willing to offer us in terms of documentation. Because as I said in my opening, we see more than 50% drop off when we need to exchange documents, even just basic documents, not documents that contain personal information. So that's been a major challenge for us.
Is there, do you retain documentation of your verification method? You put into a computer record or something like that that says this is what we did to verify that this particular customer X is low income or moderate income.
Again, I want to be careful not to mischaracterize it, just from my own lack of immediate knowledge at this point in time in terms of our internal processes. We do not retain any of the information that we receive from them, be that W-2s or other.
Do you maintain any records that say this is how I verified? Maybe not. You're not keeping it, for example, but you're saying this is how I verified that income.
I believe that we do, but if the commission wants to do a deeper dive into the company and how we're approaching these things, we would certainly welcome that conversation. I might not have all the answers here today, but we would welcome working with you to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Garofalo, is it staff's position that if it were to review a subscriber organization and they, for example, had pictures of let's say they took with their cell phone when they signed somebody up, a picture of their letter accepting their MEEP, saying that they were a participant in MEEP. Are you suggesting that that is insufficient income verification, that the staff would file a complaint?
No, we think that would be sufficient because that would be verification not done by the supplier organization, except through getting the supplier organization would not have verified the income, but someone would have, and they would have the proof of that verification.
So therefore, I'm confused as to why we're even here talking about Ms. Miller's list and so on and so forth, because if there's a federal or a state agency, you're telling me that you would accept that as income verification as long as they had some sort of a picture or a note in their record that's saying I saw this person's letter to from MEEP. Is that correct?
That would be sufficient for low income. And with regard to next stamp, I believe the commission staff recommended and the commission approved the inclusion of two housing developments. One was low income and the other was moderate income. They were HUD housing facilities in the Elkton area.
Okay, so Ms. Miller, why am I talking about this list if that's not really part of this issue?
I think it is part of the issue mainly because of how the regulation is worded. The regulation says the commission may establish alternative means aside from income verification or participation in OHEP. So the commission hasn't said that MEEP is fine or that this program is fine. We think that any federal or state program that uses the same low income standard or moderate income standard should be fine, but this leaves it to the commission to make the determination with regard to what programs can be used. And that's what we're asking for here, is you can issue a blanket order that just says any state or federal program that uses the same low income standard as required by the regs or uses the same moderate income as required by the regs can be used for income verification, or you can have a list of actual state and federal agencies whose programs you designate. But the regulation says the commission has to establish it. It doesn't say that anyone else can determine that this program meets the requirements. That's what we're concerned about.
Why doesn't that fit under item number 3 that says that the subscriber organization is verifying the eligibility of their subscribers?
Well, that just requires them to verify the eligibility. Number 1 says how they verify that eligibility, and that's what we're concerned about. We want to be able to assure solar developers that these state programs and these federal programs, participation in those programs other than OHEP, are enough to verify a person's income. And this regulation...
So if the regulation, were broader, if D1 were broader and said something to the effect of, that, an applicable federal or state assistance program, then you would be...
Then it would cover...
Then you wouldn't have a problem.
Then it would cover all the programs we listed and probably ones we don't even know, that we are personally unaware of.
Okay. Ms. Garofalo, can you cite to me another instance in where this commission has provided guidance on what the interpretation of a regulation?
Oh, any regulation?
Any regulation where the commission has said this is what this means?
I can't off the top of my head. I think the commission has probably opined on that, but maybe not as the only thing they were doing, but as part of what they a broader picture.
Has it been the commission's practice not to issue advisory opinions?
Oh yes, that's correct.
And would you characterize this as an advisory opinion?
I guess I would characterize this as I could see that there's a little bit of a discrepancy within the regs and that it needs to be resolved.
Would it not be resolved best through a revision to the regulation itself, potentially?
Well, we could do that.
Would it also be resolved through an affirmative request for an alternative means of verification?
In a one-time situation where someone comes before you?
Well, I mean, isn't, Ms. Miller just cited to the regulation that said the commission, may establish alternative means, so therefore the commission could not Earth Justice's request be treated as a request for an alternative means of verification?
It could be, but we would want to, of course, staff would not accede to her full request. Because,
I understand that. I understand that. But is that another way in which this commission could take this up?
That could be. If someone at this table had come to you and said, as they've said in the work group, we want to accept self-attestation only under these regulations, please tell us that is okay. I don't know if you would consider that an advisory opinion, but it would be more specific. I think our motion is specific, and theirs would be specific in the alternative. If you ruled on that, that would resolve the issue.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, wait, I think I have a couple more questions. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. How big is the census tract, Ms. Miller?
I'm afraid I'll have to get that answer for you. I'm not quite sure off the
You know,
top
I
of my
looked
head.
it up online and did not have an easy time trying to
No,
figure out how big one is.
I think to a certain extent it's like zip codes, but I don't want to say that
We don't
absolutely.
know for sure, because
But
it didn't appear to be just a zip code. It's
Yeah.
something about there's like a bunch of numbers and so on and so forth.
so I will get that information for you.
Okay, and they're revised only every 10 years, is that right? The census is every 10
The
years?
census itself is every 10 years. I think the census tracts, the agency that does the census tracts, is constantly looking at, because the census data they use for the tracts wouldn't change, but
Right.
whether the tracts themselves are correct, I think that's updated much more often.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Springer, you said in your comments that the rules require significant reworking of verification. Did you not?
I'm not sure if I said that specifically, but we would certainly argue that there's a lot of work to be done to, if not the actual program regulations, what I believe, we would certainly hope for would be something along the lines of a guidance document from the commission saying, here are the alternate means that we would accept that meet our standards.
Okay.
So it wouldn't necessarily, and from our perspective, it wouldn't necessarily require a change in the actual regulations of the program, but some sort of clarity from the commission is what we are seeking.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Your Honor, I'm told that the commission did interpret 2050, some section 10, I think, in 2016 for Potomac Edison, saying that a county is a municipal entity.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just a quick follow-up for staff, Mr. Vanderhayden. I think you said there were 2 service territories where the LMI tranche was not filled. Did I hear that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Which one?
Potomac Electric Power Company and BG&E still have significant amounts of LMI capacity.
BG&E.
Yes, sir.
Now, that's perplexing to me. So that tells me it's not necessarily, it may be the regs, because you have a high density here and you're still not filling the tranche. I need to think about that. Thank you.
Obviously, there is a lack of clarity with respect to the regulations if this diverse set of parties has come to an impasse. It sounds like the parties have worked together, at least for the last year, maybe longer, in trying to decipher what would qualify for verification. I believe everybody before the commission today is asking for some type of a written guidance document. Is that correct?
I think that's correct.
Yes.
Thank you. My proposal would be for the commission to take this under advisement and to follow up relatively quickly with a written determination to provide the parties with instructions going forward so there's no more certainty. So that's my proposal to the commission. Is there any disagreement?
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't disagree. I think that's a very prudent way to move forward. I mean, if this commission were so willing, I think we have agreement on a number of these items, particularly with regard to the proxy documents. So, I think we have all the information we need today to make such a determination, to begin to provide parties with that determination of how they can go forward. But I would be willing, to put this before a CM, and do this. But I would hope that we can do this in short order, because I think this is a very urgent matter for the success of the program.
Thank you. Any additional statements on my proposal? With that, with no objections.
Can I say one other thing to it? And I would encourage the parties to go into this deeper dive on the census tract data, because I think that could also facilitate, and again, that's what the words are in the public utility article. We're supposed to be facilitating and encouraging. So to the extent that we don't make this report, something that drags down the whole program, I think that would be another benefit to again, the community solar program and what the intent of the legislature is. So,
Commissioner,
thank you.
sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I originally wasn't going to say anything, but I would also have a request of the stakeholders that you look at what measures you may be able to take to give us confidence, to give me confidence that we're maintaining the integrity of the system and not gaming the system for the benefit of developers or potential developers. Thank you.
Seeing no objection to my proposal, the commission will take this under advisement subject to future order by the commission. Seeing no additional business before the commission today, this meeting is adjourned.